Ansellia Africana, one of those easy to grow, easy to flower orchids. Well, at least that's the way they sell it to you. And we get a lot of queries about why isn't my Ansellia flowering? So let's have a look into it. We need to understand a bit about the plant to understand why. Welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. So as usual, I'm late to the party again. I was supposed to do this video just a few days ago, and look what happened. All the flowers are gone already. But we'll do a few close-ups to show you what it should look like. But yes, Ansellia Africana, it is actually a monotypic species of orchid. And all those big words meaning that there's actually only one species in the Ansellia altogether, and that's Ansellia africana. Because as usual, those taxonomists decided there was no Ansellia gigantica, it was all Ansellia africana. Just to, well, at least this one made our lives easier. This is one of those indigenous African orchids. It stretches all the way from South Africa through the subtropical areas up into tropical Africa, and it's actually fairly widespread. But there is a slight difference as you travel up through the different regions. Often you'll find with these Ansellias, they're these sort of yellowishy green colored flowers with these brown spots on it. That's often why it's called the leopard orchid, because of those brown spots. But starting at the very southern end of their range, you'll often find a very soft, pale yellow with just about no markings on it whatsoever. And then as they move up northwards, you can find Ansellias that are almost completely brown with just that little bit of yellowness in the lip. So there's a whole variety of different color forms to the flower that they've been able to now breed together to get all these magnificent different ones that are now available. Also, there's quite a different variety in sizes of plants. From the dwarfer, smaller varieties, which get to a maximum height of about 30 centimeters, up to those beautiful, magnificent ones, which you can understand why they wanted to call them gigantica, that will reach up to 1 meter or more in height. And then your flower spikes can get 1 meter long. So that's going to give you a gigantic plant. Now you can see why they call it Ansellia gigantea. It's at least as tall as I am. The flower spikes reach taller, and I'm 6'2". So out in the wild, they found plants that they imagine are weighing over a ton in weight. So that can just give you an idea of how big these plants can actually get. So if you are wanting to include them in your collection, just remember, if you're growing indoors, rather go for the shorter, more dwarfed varieties that are going to be able to fit in your home. If you've got space, then go for those big ones because they really are glorious. And with the Ansellias, they'll often have between 7 and 9 leaves on those new canes, those new pseudobulbs as they grow. And you'll notice they will lose a lot of their leaves over the lifespan, and they are not exactly the most beautiful looking plants, but they do produce some of the most striking flowers. In a way, very similar to Grammatophyllum in their flowering. Their flowers are generally sort of mid-springish, but also with that vast distribution range, there's a big difference in how some of them flower. Some of them can start as early as midwinter, and others all the way into midsummer. So with these new hybrids, you're getting a bigger range of flowering periods than what you do from some of the species themselves. And some of these new hybrids can actually flower a couple of times a year, which is what all of us orchid lovers want. And if we look at the roots of Ansellia, we'll notice they're dimorphic. Dimorphic? Well, there's 2 types of roots that they produce. First of all, the ones that you're most likely to see are these upright, sort of like spiky, needle-like roots. These are actually non-absorbent roots. They're not going to absorb any moisture or any nutrient or anything. They're basically just there to help catch that falling debris, the leaves and whatever else might fall, and help form an ecosystem in and around the plant to help it to grow. And the roots themselves are those big, voluptuous, velamen-wrapped roots that most orchids have, and those do the attaching to the plant itself and then the absorbing. And sometimes in culture you may not notice these needle-like leaves that stick up, because often they'll only be produced if the plant is nitrogen deficient, and then we'll use that to catch all that material so that it can have that material decompose and provide nitrogen to it. And what that is doing, it's providing an environment that is right for fungi. So it's getting all that mycorrhizal fungi to grow in and around it and decompose that plant material so that it can then absorb those nutrients that are then released. So you'll notice with Ansellias, often they decompose your media in your pot far faster than the majority of other orchids, because they're producing that whole little environment that is ideal for those mycorrhizal fungi to decompose organic material so that it can feed your orchid. It's a wonderful method, but not so easy when you don't want to have to repot your orchids that frequently. So if you look carefully here in these ones are in a very stony mix. This obviously needs to be repotted, but the majority of the media is just basically this hard stone. Because also we need to understand that these Ansellias come from dry, hot areas. Although they, as I've said, they come from the tropics, whoopsie, but they generally come from the lowland forests, or not really even forests, but more woodlands. They're growing in trees that produce just a very light shade to them that will basically only shade them during the heat of the midsummer's day, but in winter those trees will lose their leaves and these Ansellias will be getting full sun all day long. That's not to say they're not going to be able to endure that heat and sun throughout the day, which they do, especially if they're near rivers and such where the humidity levels are slightly higher. But they don't get rain all year long. They get very distinct periods of rain, and that's usually during the growing period through spring and summer, and then they go through very dry winter months. So to help force your Ansellia's buds to form, they need to go through that rest period, especially in that early autumn phase. In that early fall, they want to go through at least 4 weeks of dryness. So you don't have to water your Ansellia at all for that period, especially if your temperatures get a bit lower. If you're still sticking in and around the 30s or 90 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that, then yes, maybe you want to just give it a light spray. But we don't want to allow your root mass to really get too wet, because we need to get that dry period to force those buds to start forming. So Ansellias will take temperatures anywhere in the range of around 10 degrees Celsius all the way up to about 43 degrees Celsius. They really are heat tolerant orchids. But so what is that? That's approximately 45 degrees Fahrenheit to a lot Fahrenheit. Their ideal range is sort of probably between 15 degrees Celsius and 33 degrees, which off the top of my head is probably around 50 degrees Fahrenheit to 90 degrees Fahrenheit is probably their ideal temperature range all year round. And here we have temperatures that drop down below 10 degrees. We get winter evening temperatures of as low as 2 degrees here, and they still grow pretty well for us. And we grow these hard, meaning we go hang them outside in the sun and leave them. They hardly ever get fed, they just about never get watered, and they basically look after themselves. These we've acquired from another collection, and we've had them for just over a year now. So we can see now how this one has produced its new growth and then flowered off the end of it. These ones produced new growths and they haven't flowered, but they're sending up their new pseudobulbs. So they're not going to flower immediately off those new pseudobulbs. They need that whole year to harden off before they'll then flower on them the next year. And generally they flower right off the tips of those pseudobulbs. Although there are varieties that can occasionally send out blooms from lower down, but generally it's from right off the tip. So it allows those flowers to be shown off magnificently. And if you're asking, why isn't my Ansellia flowering? And the question I need to then ask you is, are you giving it enough sun? Remember where I said that they're growing in the woodlands on those deciduous trees, and those woodland trees have a very light covering of leaves that allows lots of light and sun through onto the plants. And they grow high up on those branches so they can get as close to that light as possible. Invariably, you want that yellowness in the leaves of your Ansellia for them to flower. They'll almost look sickly and like they want to die on you, but that's the way that they actually really want to be to produce those flowers. If you've got this beautiful lush green plant, then you're not giving it enough light. This is probably the majority of the reason that your Ansellia is not flowering is light. But then again, remember that dry period in early autumn. They need that dry period just to harden off their canes and force those buds to burst. And remember, if you're wanting to use an organic medium, you're going to have to repot your plant frequently. So rather use lacquer or stone or any of these inorganic, or even charcoal, any other of these inorganic media that isn't going to rot away. It will still allow the mycorrhizal fungi to grow and reproduce and flourish in your plant, and any leaves or any other detritus that will fall in between it can then be decomposed by that, and that will feed your plant. So always when feeding Ansellias, I always like to feed an organic plant food. So just spraying it in and around the base, and then also giving it a good foliar feed too is also a good option. But as I said, if you are feeding frequently, you may not notice as much or any at all of those needle-like or hair-like roots that grow vertically upwards. And in those areas that you've got that dendrobium beetle, please be aware, this is another one of their favorites. They're going to eat it as quickly as they will your dendrobiums. So keep an eye out for that, and keep an eye out for those slugs and snails coming to those new opening buds. They produce an amazing little scent that's going to attract them, and you're going to have to keep an eye out, otherwise they'll munch your blooms away. They also do have a scent. It's a bit of a, how can you explain it? A musky sort of scent. Not necessarily the most attractive scent, but it's interesting. So Ansellia is definitely something I think everyone should grow in their collections. They are actually relatively easy to maintain and look after, and they can actually be quite easy to get to flower. Just as long as you know those few little tricks on managing your plant, and you'll get those beautiful blooms. And also remember, these old yellow canes are not removed. You're keeping them on your plant because it does use it as a reserve of energy. Although if you are growing them indoors, perhaps you can remove them as long as you are making sure you're keeping up your feeding and watering regime right. Just with us growing them outdoors, and we do give them that hard growing conditions, I always leave them on all the way through until they become brown and desiccated. And oopsie, that one doesn't want to tear off, but generally they'll just tear off, so that can stay on until it's ready. And then the biggest factor in killing your plant, especially these Ansellias, is overwatering. So allow them to dry out quite well before you rewater again. And again, I'll say it again, give them that winter rest. They need that drying period. If your temperatures cool down and you're watering them, you will rot your plant. So please, just be careful with that watering. Give them lots of sun and they'll bless you with flowers. And I would definitely like to make a call out to everyone living in Africa. Please buy an Ansellia. Put it in your garden. Put it in a tree. Anywhere. Because these are becoming slowly extinct in the wild, being used for traditional medicines. They're used for silly things such as keeping away ghosts, making sure you have pleasant dreams, and well, to me, that's just nonsensical use of such a beautiful plant. If you believe in higher powers, rather believe that the higher power put this plant on this planet to give us joy and not for us to destroy. And I think that's everything. Thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button down below and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.